Hello, I'm Tom Gregory with Youngstown Christian Television. Thanks for joining us on the YouTube channel here and watching the program that you're about to see. Before you do that, if you could hit the subscribe button and join us, that way you'll always be informed of what's going on with Youngstown Christian Television every time we put a new video up on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Can we use science to prove that God created all that we have? How old is our world and the universe? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a program where we seek to integrate the Bible with history and show where they come together and the influences they had upon one another. This program is produced at Youngstown Christian Television in Youngstown, Ohio. As you remember, last time we were looking at Egypt, which falls into the category of ancient times. Ancient times runs from the beginning of history, which we've looked at extensively, on up through just before the times of Jesus. And as we've been looking at ancient Egypt, as you remember, we were seeing that Egypt's history, the ancient history, can be divided up into three major kingdom eras. First, there's the Old Kingdom, and then later is the Middle Kingdom period, and then finally, you guessed it, the New Kingdom period. In between each of these kingdom periods, there are intermediate periods of civil unrest when there is no longer a central authority. And we'll talk about those as we go along. As we go back to the Old Kingdom period, we saw that there was a centralized authority finally established for all of Egypt. And it came to be believed that the rulers who ruled did so by divine right, that the gods had appointed them, and in fact, it will come to be believed that they are gods themselves. A great bureaucracy was established to run the kingdom. During this Old Kingdom period, we find the beginning of the building of pyramids. This is the first pyramid ever built in Egypt, built by Imhotep. His name means he who comes in peace. He was also skilled in medicine and is considered, in a sense, a father of medicine. He was an advisor to Pharaoh Zoser, or Zoser is sometimes is spelled. And that name means the holy. So you can see the connection between pharaohs and divinity even in this early period. Now he also has a Horus name. I'll explain more about this later, but a Horus name is the name given to him because it's believed that he embodies the god Horus while he is alive on earth. And his Horus name is very interesting. It is Neterket, which means God in the flesh. Now, I wonder whether this was something that had been transferred orally from the very time of Adam and Eve. Remember, Eve was told that someday the seed of the woman, her seed, would crush the head of the serpent. And of course, throughout those ages, to the time of Noah and following, there was an expectation that there would be one who would come from God someday to remedy the evils of the world. Now, some even believe that this Pharaoh Zoser was actually Ham, the son of Noah. And as you know from reading the book of Genesis, the three sons of Ham, or the three sons of Noah, Ham was the rebellious one, may have been in fact behind the rebellion of the Tower of Babel as well. So he took upon this name, God in the flesh. Did he have delusions of grandeur? It's hard to say. Next to this step pyramid were also some small adjacent pyramids built to bury the king's wives. Now let's jump ahead to the most famous pyramid of all, One in the last few weeks you've seen a video account from the studios of PBS, and that is the Great Pyramid, which is the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu in the 4th dynasty. This pyramid is 451 feet high. Now, some will say that the pyramid was 492 feet high. This discrepancy may be due to the fact that Arabs stole the uppermost stones from the pyramid to construct their own buildings in AD 650. That may account for the difference in height, I'm not sure. Each side of the pyramid is 776 feet long. Now you can imagine what it would take to construct an object like this, stone by stone, and we'll talk about the size of the stones in a moment, but bringing them together as a solid object, and how would you get it to come out just right? I'll tell you, the dimensions are such that it's remarkable, because even though each side is 776 feet long, the difference between the longest and the shortest sides is only 7.9 inches. That's hard to even imagine. The 4 corners of the pyramid are nearly perfect, with a variation of less than 1/20th of a degree. These guys knew what they were doing. It covers, on its base, 13 acres. It took 2,300,000 blocks of limestone, each block weighing an average of 2.5 tons. The total cubic feet is 25 million cubic feet. And here you can see, looking at the blocks, now you can see how large those blocks are when you see people on them. It took more than 20 years to build. Now, there's been a lot of speculation over the centuries, really, as to who built the pyramid, that is, who provided the manual labor. And some even have posited the idea that the Israeli or Hebrew slaves were involved in building it, but that's categorically untrue. The Hebrews were not there for a long time after this, as we'll see. But in fact, recently it's been discovered that it was not even built by slaves at all. There have been uncovered the nearby towns that were there for the purpose of housing those that were working on the pyramids. And it was determined by what was found there that these people were not slaves, but they were, in fact, probably farmers or artisans that lived in Egypt and were brought there for different periods of time to work on the pyramid. And it took over 20 years to build it. Here's another picture showing just the size of those blocks and how difficult it must have been to move them in place. And especially when you understand that the space between each block is only the width of a piece of papyrus. That led me to believe at one point that maybe these stones weren't dragged there, but were poured like concrete. That's still a possibility, but we'll see in a moment another way in which the stones were moved into place. Here's a close-up, again, of the pyramid. One interesting thing about being there is, unlike most sites that we would go to in the United States and maybe other parts of the world, there was no one there guarding the pyramid. You could walk up and pick up stones that had fallen off, had broken off the pyramid, and take them with you. It's pretty wide open. Just have to watch out for those that are trying to sell you things. They'll employ any means possible. While I was walking toward the pyramid, a trader came up to me and asked me if I was American. And when I said yes, he said, "I have a gift for you." Well, we had been in Egypt long enough for me to know that that was just a trick. the idea is if they put something in your hand, then they expect something to be put back in their hand. And so he put a scarf or something in my hand as I was walking. And I hate to be rude like this because we don't do things that way here, but I just had to drop it and walk on. Because once you engage in any kind of conversation, they've got you. This next picture shows another close-up looking at the stones that are used. The following picture is one I took because of what I thought was an interesting design on there. Just kind of like looking at the clouds. What do you see? Well, what I saw was the head of a lion. And that impressed me. I thought that was pretty cool, the head of a lion there in the pyramids. And here I am, standing in front of the pyramids. You can tell this was a few years ago. And there's my wife, Beth, also on the pyramid looking down. So I show you these just to give you an idea of the immenseness of the stones used and of the pyramid itself. Here's a drawing that someone has made showing some of the inner workings of the pyramid. You can see that there was a original burial chamber underneath the pyramid, and that was moved. Then you can see the shafts going up into the interior of the pyramid. Here's then a closer view of looking down on the pyramid and seeing its relationship to the Queen's pyramids, the mortuary temple, which was always built near Pharaoh's tomb, be a small temple there, and then a causeway running out to the valley temple. Now here's where I've found something that might give us an idea of how they were built. There were drawings found that indicate that at least for some of the movement of stone, that this kind of a contraption was employed. Still very difficult work indeed. Now here's a wider shot looking at the 3 pyramids that are there at Gaza, just outside of the city of Cairo. I don't know whether you can see, maybe we can see it in a later picture, but most of the pictures you see the pyramids, it looks like it's out in the middle of the desert somewhere, but it's actually not. Yeah, it looks pretty deserty right there, but if you look way behind the pyramids, you see some of the city of Cairo, and it actually comes up right very close to the pyramids. Here's a picture of the temple next to the Great Pyramid, and you can see some of the city behind there. Also, if you have a mind to, near the pyramids, you can take a camel ride. Napoleon, when he was there, calculated that the 3 pyramids contained enough stone to build a wall 10 feet high and 1 foot wide all the way around France. That's a lot of rock. Well, during the same time period, during the Old Kingdom period, we have another great icon of Egypt, and that is the Great Sphinx. The Sphinx is, by definition, the head of a man and the body of an animal, in this case, the body of a lion. And again, what a great feat of construction that was. This Great Sphinx is 66 feet high. Here's a view from the side, and that is as close as I could get to the Sphinx. You can see that, of course, as known famously, the face is worn away, especially the nose is gone. Now, something else that developed during the Old Kingdom period was mummification. You're familiar with that, I'm sure. It's the preparation of a dead pharaoh for the afterlife. And in the process, they would remove the organs of the pharaoh, and they put them into canopic jars, of which this is a model. And so they would put them in these jars. They would have a lid, and they would enclose the jars with the mummified pharaoh so that he could have access to his organs in the afterlife. Oh, there was one organ that they didn't put into a canopic jar, and that was the brain. In fact, they would pull the brain out through the nostrils, and because they weren't sure what it was, they threw it away. The purpose of mummification, as I said, was to provide a means for Pharaoh to go into the afterlife. At night they would return to their bodies, and there's a lot you can read about mummification online. At the end of the 6th dynasty, that is the 6th family ruling in ancient Egypt during the Old Kingdom, a form of feudalism set in with the power of local hereditary monarchs and the priests having greater power than Pharaoh. Because of the centrality of religion for the Egyptians, priests would continue to play an important role through Egyptian history. At the top of the tree was the high priest, or Sem priest, the first prophet of God, he was called. He was usually old and wise and would have been a political advisor to the Pharaoh as well as a religious leader. On the next rung down were priests who specialized in watching the universe and interpreting its movements. Some were horologists, measuring the hours in the day. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Get back on track here. There we go. The horologists kept track of the hours. Others studied astrology, a discipline which was central to Egyptian mythology. Some studied architecture and some medicine. The movements of the universe determined when the temples would open. It determined crop planting and the level of the Nile River. So these were important things, important jobs for someone to have. One of the most holy jobs a priest could have was to care for an oracle, which usually took the form of a statue. The importance of the job required these priests, known as stolists, to keep themselves as pure as possible. To do this, they would shave off all of their body hair. Whatever their position, all priests had to obey a number of strict rules. They could not eat fish, which was seen as peasant food, or wear wool, because most animal products were viewed as unclean. Many priests took 3 or 4 baths a day in sacred pools in order to keep themselves pure, and male priests were also usually circumcised. You can see that the view of priests have not changed all that much throughout all the centuries in different cultures. Some of those same ideas have been continued. Just an interesting side note, during this time, an Egyptian record records 5 military expeditions against what they call the sand dwellers of southern Palestine. Now, following this Old Kingdom period, we come to our first time of unrest, and that is the first intermediate period. This would include the 9th and 10th dynasties, and this is where the book of Genesis picks up. In Genesis 12 through 50, we find a lot of interaction between Egypt and the people in the book of Genesis. During this period, there are civil conflicts, there's war and division, as 2 particular cities, Heracleopolis and Thebes, competed for power. There's Thebes, and there is Heracleopolis. Bedouins, that is wanderers from Asia, and that would include anything to the east and north of Egypt, settled in the Delta region. And Thebes was eventually victorious in 2040 BC. In their literature, you can see a great deal of pessimism because of the unsettled nature of what was happening throughout Egypt. And some in Egypt moved away from the centralized government and Pharaoh into more local governments. And because of the less emphasis upon Pharaoh, life after death extended beyond Pharaoh and the royalty. So the mummification process that had been reserved for Pharaoh was extended to other royal officials, at least, and royal families. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out to you was this mummy coffin. You can see it has a lot of design and hieroglyphics on it. Most of the time there would be hieroglyphics telling something of the person's life, and often the face of the person buried would be on the coffin. In this particular case, though, the face is that of the god Anubis, the jackal god, who is the god of the dead. And you open up a coffin, and inside you would find the mummy. What's true of this one is true of a lot of coffins that have been found in Egypt, and that is when they opened them up, they were empty. Because from the time of Napoleon on, Europeans became fascinated with mummies and even believed that if you ground up a mummy and drank it, it had all kinds of medicinal qualities, including helps for the sexual drive. And so a lot of tombs in Egypt were looted, not only for the gold and silver that was contained therein, but also so that they might acquire these mummies. Can you imagine selling that on the streets of Paris? Get your dried mummy here, grind it up, put it in a drink. It's just amazing what people will believe when told all kinds of fantastic stories. By the way, if you'd like to see some excellent coffins, mummy coffins, you can go to Egypt to the museum in Cairo, which has King Tut's coffin and others, many others as well. But interestingly, in what's close to us in Cleveland, Ohio, at the Museum of Art, they have a good display of mummy coffins as well. And so you can see them, and other artifacts from Egypt are there as well. So I highly recommend the Museum of Art in Cleveland, Ohio. Well, during this intermediate period, as I said, there was a lot of unrest, but that will all come to an end as well as finally someone gains control. And as you said, Thebes was victorious there. But in the meantime, there's one more item we want to look at, and that is a pharaoh by the name of Wakari Keti. He also took for himself the name Aktoi IV. Now, he is known as a person in the intermediate period who ruled over part of Egypt, and he's known for giving instructions to his son. Now, if we can get a close-up here of the letter he wrote, we can see what he said. Good advice. He said, "Be a craftsman in speech, so that thou mayest be strong, for the tongue is a sword to a man, and speech is more valorous than any fighting. One can circumvent the skillful of heart. They who know his wisdom do not attack him, and no misfortune occurs where he is. Copy thy fathers and thy ancestors. Behold, their words remain in writing. Open that thou mayest read and copy their wisdom. Thus the skilled man becomes learned. Advance thy great men, so that they may carry out thy laws. Mayest thou speak justice in thine own house, that the great ones who are on earth may fear thee. Uprightness of heart is fitting for the Lord." Now, it's not talking about the Lord of Israel. It's talking about their own gods. "Do justice whilst thou endurest upon earth. Quiet the weeper. Do not oppress the widow. Supplant no man in the property of his father, and impair no officials at their posts. Be on thy guard against punishing wrongfully. Do no slaughter. it is not of advantage to thee. But thou shouldst punish with beatings and with arrests. This land will be firmly grounded thereby. Do not prefer the well-born to the commoner, but choose a man on account of his skills. That's very good advice for anyone coming into power. And as you know from history, there have been many kings that have not taken that advice. Many rulers of other sorts that have not taken this great advice that was given to Merikara. Well, before we leave the intermediate period, I want us to consider that God's call and promise was active at this time. The descendants of Noah had spread out, multiplied, and populated the earth. And they had again abandoned the God who created them, as you remember. Yet God had not abandoned mankind. He called one man, Abram, and told him that if he would leave his country and go to a land God would show him, he would make of Abram a great nation. God would give him that land, and through him all the world would be blessed. This was the Abrahamic covenant. It would be through Abram's descendants that the Savior of the world would come. In faith, Abram obeyed God. He was the world's first monotheist following the flood. For even Abram's family were idol worshippers, as we're told. And so God is working through the family of Abram. And as we'll see, there's a connection with Egypt coming up. This is the patriarchal period, as we call it in the Bible. So we have Terah fathering Abraham. We see that Abraham was married to Sarah, which produced Isaac. Of course, he had relations with Hagar, producing Ishmael, and you can see the line going from there. Isaac married Rebekah, and all from his uncle Laban, and that Rebekah gave birth to Esau and Jacob. Isaac also, Jacob then married his relative Leah and also Rachel through this time with Laban after deceiving Isaac and getting the birthright. And then through Jacob we have 12 sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. Two of them, Joseph and Benjamin, through his beloved Rachel. Now we're going to see here that Abram also journeyed to Egypt from the land of Canaan. There came a time of famine when Abraham went to Egypt to escape the famine. It's my opinion that in this Abraham was disobedient to God, because God had said that he would bless Abraham in that land, and yet he became afraid of famine and departed for Egypt. When he went there, as you remember, he had his wife Sarai lie about the relationship and say that she was his sister. And there's a very good reason for that we can find in the laws of ancient Egypt, how ancient Egypt was functioning at that time. And we'll look at that next time on Discovering His Story. If you have not watched the previous episodes, I invite you to go to the archive and begin at the beginning, so to speak, and see why we began where we did in our study of history, and some of the many things that we've already learned concerning what the Bible has to say about this ancient world. And as we'll see next time, Abraham not only has an influence on Egypt, but Egypt's going to have an influence on Abraham as well. So make sure you join us next week for Discovering His Story.